Hello, my name is Rebecca Litz, and I am going to be presenting harassment in the workplace for you today. Thank you so much for joining. I am your account manager from Perspectives, your employee assistance program. And this is a really important presentation, certainly because of the topic. Secondly, because Illinois has a new law in place called the Workplace Transparency Act, which does require that all employees in Illinois receive annual harassment training. So that is why we are doing this today. So let's go ahead and first take a look. Just really quickly, the Employee Assistance Program is available for all of you and your family members. And especially during COVID, I think everyone has been dealing with stress in many new ways, and we are finding new stressors every day, whether it's having to manage work-life issues that we've never had to deal with before, whether kids are remote learning or if you are in a remote work environment, maybe you've been impacted by COVID in other ways. We are here to be able to provide a support for both you and your family members. Right now, we are doing HIPAA compliant Zoom counseling sessions. We can also talk with you via chat, or you can download our app, which is called Spark. And again, our program is no cost to you. It is confidential, and we have a short-term counseling model. So if it is a short-term issue, you will continue to meet with the same counselor. And there is, again, no copay. We do not use your insurance. And then if somebody does need something that is a longer-term concern, we will be more than happy to help coordinate that referral for that longer-term care. So what we're going to do today is really kind of three basic things. First, we're going to look at sexual harassment and other types of harassment in the workplace. And then really kind of 2 and 3 are together, where we're going to talk more about how all of us can really help maintain a harassment-free environment. And then how do we just increase that overall respect in the workplace? So we have a little pre-test here. So what I'd like you to do is just think about whether or not the answers to these questions are true or false, and then I will give you the answers. So the first question is this. If you are feeling, let me just pull this up really quick here. So if you are in a situation at work where you're feeling like somebody is making, if somebody's making jokes or comments that are uncomfortable, if you ignore harassment, it will usually stop. And what are your thoughts on that? So the answer to this one is false. Harassment rarely stops without intervention. And the reason is that there are times when people are really unaware that their behavior is perceived as harassment. When we think about how diverse our workplace is, we have all different kinds of people who come into work. We have diversity that people see. We have diversity that people don't see. And sometimes people have very different senses of humor. We have different experiences. And there are times when people may unintentionally be harassing, and it's just because they don't know. And unless it's brought to their attention, their behavior may continue. And so that's where you really want to be able to bring it up and let somebody know the impact of their behavior. So the next one kind of goes along with this, is telling someone to stop his or her unwanted behavior usually doesn't do any good. Is that true or false? And if you guessed false, you are correct. Most people will stop when asked. And again, it kind of goes to that whole point of sometimes people are just very unaware of the impact that their behavior is having on people. Now, this is going to be the next one. It's kind of, this might be a little bit more tricky. So if an employee routinely compliments all of her coworkers, male and female, young or old, by commenting on how hot or attractive they look, it wouldn't be fair to equate those comments with sexual harassment. since she says them to everyone equally. So, what are your thoughts on that one? True or false? This one is also false. So, harassment is seen through the eyes of the victim, not the intentions of the harasser. So, even with well-intentioned comments, those could offend and violate your employer's policy or the law. So, again, being very mindful that, again, harassment is seen through the eyes of the victim. The other kind of standard that we look at is a reasonable person standard of would a reasonable person object to whatever it is, whether it's a joke, a comment, a behavior, whatever it might be. It's that reasonable person standard. So we're going to go ahead and look a little bit more into this topic, and we'll see kind of where it takes us. So when we think about what workplace harassment means to you, I think, there's a lot of different things that people think about. Probably one of the bigger things is, you might think about this as more verbal type harassment or different things that people might say. And that definitely is a piece. A lot of times we think about harassment as strictly sexual harassment, but it really is, that's one element of harassment, but there is a lot of other forms of harassment that can occur in the workplace. So when we look it up here, it can be teasing, slurs, different comments, jokes, interesting, the unwelcome compliments, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But, again, pictures, cartoons, innuendos. Harassment generally falls into two categories. One is sexual harassment, and then the other one is this hostile work environment. And that hostile work environment can really apply to any of the protected classes. So anything that has to do with race, religion, sexual or national origin, sexual orientation, all of those elements start to fall under that harassment guideline. And so when we think about unwelcome compliments, people will sometimes meet in the workplace and they will develop romantic relationships, they will date. If that's not against policy, it's something that happens. And there may be, compliments that happen, or, different nicknames that people have for each other. And then if that relationship ends, something that maybe was a welcome compliment or a welcome nickname now is unwelcome. And that's the key piece, is once something becomes unwelcome, then it can fall under harassment in the workplace. And so what we want to look at is really these kind of three elements. One is the behavior intimidating? And by intimidating does it make a person feel uncomfortable or anxious or having some kind of negative feeling, where maybe people are doing a workaround, or I don't want to walk down that hallway because so-and-so's there. And I get nervous about being around that particular person. The other element is that it has to be persistent and unwelcome. So by persistent, it's really the behavior continues after the person is asked to stop. Now, when we look at the different types of harassment, we've got hostile work environment, and then we also have quid pro quo. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that quid pro quo when we talk about sexual harassment specifically. But essentially, quid pro quo is, I will give you this if you do that for me. And it is always some type of sexual favor that is requested in exchange for some type of workplace benefit. And in the cases of that quid pro quo harassment, it does not have to be persistent. It can be one incident only, and that is enough to constitute harassment in the workplace. But generally, again, giving that person an opportunity to stop the behavior, and they continue. So an example, again, maybe somebody asks a coworker out for a date, and that person says, no, I don't date coworkers. And then every day the person says, hey, did you want to go out for dinner with me tonight? What about today? Is it different? And they keep asking and asking and asking. It's persistent. And the person has said, no, I don't date coworkers. So that can constitute harassment in the work environment. The other part is that it may or may not be intentional. And to be aware that sometimes people, again, they make a mistake and they have no intention of being harassing. And once they're asked to stop, they will immediately stop the behavior. What I also want you to be mindful of is that you have, when you are working in your professional capacity, harassment applies to all of your coworkers, but it also applies to any people who you are interacting with in the course of your day-to-day job. So it can be parents of your students, it can be different vendors. Again, anyone who you are coming into contact with in your professional environment, you have the right to work in an environment that is free of harassment under any circumstances. So I hope that is clear for all of you. So essentially what we're looking at is harassment creates that intimidating, hostile, or offensive working environment. And then that purpose is to interfere with someone's work performance, where it might be creating anxiety, absenteeism, fear, stress. What is the impact that it's having? And then it may also impact someone's individual's employment opportunities. So, did somebody get a demotion because of a quid pro quo harassment type situation, or were their reviews harmed because of that? Did somebody not get a raise? They got a bad shift at work. All of those different kinds of things. Or maybe someone is afraid to apply for a promotion because they don't want to work with another colleague, or they don't want to be around a certain person because of the impact of their behavior. So this is a really important piece of sexual harassment is prohibited and illegal. And then below, you can see that these are all of those different protected classes. So harassment based on someone's race, religion, color, national origin, age, sexual orientation, marital status, or the presence of any physical, mental, or sensory disabilities can all be illegal and are always inappropriate. And so I like to think about kind of a good rule is, if whatever you're joking about or posting or anything, if it touches on one of these protected classes, when in doubt, don't. And a lot of times I think this topic makes people sort of nervous of, well, we can't have any more fun at work, or, what if, how are we going to, make a joke, or, there's nothing that's safe. Honestly, having a good working knowledge of harassment actually makes the workplace more fun. You can enjoy each other's company a lot more. And the key is, we want to have fun with our coworkers. We don't want to have fun at the expense of someone else. And so this really creates an environment where everyone feels welcome, everyone feels safe. And when people feel welcome and safe, everyone has the ability to be at their best. And truly, that's what we want. We want everyone to feel good about coming to work. We want everyone feeling good about contributing, and they feel confident in all of their interactions with people, and people can really function as their best. So again, this is just kind of a nice little guide of, what are the areas that can create concern in the workplace. So again, these are just the protected classes. If anyone wants to know about age, the protected class is age 40 and over. I don't know exactly how 40 was chosen, but that's the age. But again, being aware of innuendos, jokes, anything like that that would touch on one of these categories is kind of that danger zone. Now, sexual harassment generally is where we see things in the news, just because these are really big cases. I think our most current one certainly is the Harvey Weinstein case, and when you think about that particular case, that was a quid pro quo. So, if people wanted to have a role, it's like, hey, if you want this, role in this movie, here's what you're going to do for me. Again, he was in a position where he could grant that favor. So if you do this, then I will do this for you. We have a video presentation, just due to buffering, we're not able to show it in the remote presentations, but there was an example of a woman who was, she had a new job and she was still on probation from her work. And the manager was kind of going over some different things with her. And he said, there's a lot to learn in this new position. And what might be really helpful to kind of get you through probation is if you would, come out to dinner with me, and we can go over a few of those things that you really can't learn during the workday. And she said back, hey, I think I can get what I need from, during the day. And she essentially declined going out for dinner with him. And he said, well, good luck, but maybe this job really isn't for you. And so he threatened her employment because she didn't want to go out on the date with him. So it could be something like that, to, again, even bigger types of concerns. And sexual harassment, again, it's a form of gender discrimination. And it also violates, so it violates Title VII, as well as the new Illinois Workplace Transparency Act. So here is just kind of a little synopsis of the new Illinois law. So it makes sexual harassment a civil rights violation. And then essentially the differences of, with this act, what happened is that employers, again, need to have those policies to ensure that their environment is free of sexual harassment, and then to make sure, that they have policy to report it. The other piece that is new with this particular law is that we have to provide both internal reporting and then also external reporting, so that anyone who feels that they are a target or have been victimized by sexual harassment, there's a number of different ways that they can report their concern. And then the other piece is that every employer must provide annual sexual harassment training to all of the employees. So those are essentially kind of the new elements with this Workplace Transparency Act. Okay, so here is where we're going to look at, again, kind of going into that more depth with that quid pro quo. So it's unwelcome sexual advances, can be verbal or physical. And the key here is, I talked earlier about everyone has a right to work in a harassment-free environment, whether it's a vendor, a parent, with one of their students, again, fellow coworkers, etc. With quid pro quo, this is a little bit different in that the person who is doing the harassing has to be in a position where they can give or take away that particular favor, or they can have some type of, you can have some type of, I don't want to say necessarily punishment, but you can have a negative impact if you don't comply with that sexual request. So it could be, if you wanted a particular sale, if it's a vendor and the vendor says, well, you know what, if you want my business, here's what you're going to need to do for me. Or if you want this promotion, here's what you're going to need to do. All of those kinds of things, but the person has to be in that position. So this is not going to be a peer-to-peer type situation that would happen. But if it's not that quid pro quo, it can still be that hostile work environment where there can be that intimidating or kind of hostile or offensive environment. And again, that can be done by anyone who's, whether they're in a position of authority or not. Okay, so when we look at this question of people who are offended by harassment can stop the behavior by, so what are some ideas? You kind of think about what you might do to stop the behavior. So hopefully the first thing you're going to think about is talking to the person. If you feel safe to do that, again, I talked about earlier, not everyone is, it's not intentional with some people. And so sometimes just bringing it up and saying, hey, you know what, that joke may be really uncomfortable. I really don't want you to talk about that anymore, or I don't like that nickname, please stop using it. And you can kind of just end it right there. This is another kind of acronym that you can use. And what I like about this is that it's essentially assertive communication. And it gives people an opportunity to talk about what happened and stop the behavior before it gets worse. And you can just sort of deal with it internally and just take care of it. So verbalizing the behavior that you find offensive. So, what is it? And then using those I statements of, how do you feel? When you tell jokes about whatever, I feel hurt, I feel offended, whatever it might be, and then notify the person of what you'd like to see or what you want done. I want you to stop telling those kinds of jokes. And then the T is tell them what you'll do if the behavior continues. So I will tell our supervisor, I will talk to human resources if the behavior continues. And the key with this is it gives you an opportunity, again, to address any kind of concern. And what I think is nice about this is I like to assume that people have good intentions when they come to work. That nobody purposefully comes to work with the idea of wanting to offend people. Occasionally people can make mistakes. And this gives you the opportunity to address a potential mistake and being able to just bring it up and take care of it. And then hopefully that person will say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. I will stop it immediately. Thank you for telling me. But what happens here is you can put it out in the open and hopefully, again, address it so that both of you can just move on and go about your day. Now, again, this is only if you feel safe in order to do it. The other thing that you want to be mindful of is your tone of voice. These are not comfortable conversations to have with anybody. And so being able to use a firm, assertive tone of voice so that the person knows that you're not kidding. Okay. I don't like it when you call me X. It makes me uncomfortable. And I want you to call me by my first name moving forward. If you continue to use that nickname, I'll need to let human resources know. Okay. Just clear, concise, to the point, and then you're done. Now, you certainly, and I alluded to, you have internal resources, but then you also have additional reporting options that are available to you. So you can see you've got your state of Illinois, you've got sexual harassment and discrimination hotline, you've got a website, you've got local offices. So these are all available to you and they are in the handout. So please feel free to keep this handy. And there's more. So here you go. Here is the EEOC information. Again, you've got phone numbers, websites, and then local offices. Again, these are all available as external resources for you in order to report if that's more comfortable. All right, so we also want to look at if you observe harassment, what can you do? And this can be a little bit kind of tricky because sometimes there's a lot of reasons why people are uncomfortable about, reporting if you're not the one involved. Just like, oh, is this my business? I don't know. Should I get involved? Should I not get involved? And the answer is you should get involved. And so how do you kind of help stop that behavior? So there's a couple of different things that you can think about. So looking at this kind of direct communication. So if you're a direct observer of the situation, maybe the person who was on the receiving end isn't comfortable. And you can see it's like, they're not saying anything. And so you can use that VENT acronym and be able to say, how that might feel of, I don't like, when you're making jokes about somebody's race, that's uncomfortable to me. And I would prefer that you not do it. I want you to stop making those kinds of comments. And just be real clear, I overheard this conversation. I'm not comfortable with it. And this is why. It could be, that indirect communication where you may pull that person to the side who was making those comments or, whatever it might be, and just say, you know what, that feels real inappropriate and you really should stop. I don't like seeing that, or I don't like hearing that. And it's just not okay. The other thing that you may end up doing is contacting an internal resource to say, hey, I just want you to know this is what I saw, or this is what I heard. I wanted you to be aware. Now, question, whether it is you being the observer and reporting it, or if you are the person who was the target of the harassment. Let's say you contact human resources principal, whoever it might be, and you say, hey, you know what? I want you to know this, but can you just kind of keep it to yourself? Like, don't do anything with it. I just wanted to give you a heads up. What do you think the answer is for that? Can they keep it confidential? The answer is no. Once there is an allegation of harassment, it must be investigated. Okay, and that's a really key factor. Now, this doesn't mean that there's going to be a school-wide memo that goes out of like, hey, did you hear? But there has to be an investigation to determine, yes or no, did this happen? So is it founded? And then what is the scope? And it's an important element, because if you are part of an investigation, maybe you're going to be interviewed, maybe there were other witnesses, you would probably be interviewed. You want to keep it as confidential as possible. So if you're interviewed, you don't need to be spreading it around that you were interviewed. Just comply with the interview and be done. Because there may be times when that allegation is unfounded, and we don't want to make it worse for the person who was accused. And we also don't want to make it worse for the person who was the alleged victim. Okay, we want, these are very painful, stressful situations for everyone to be in. And so you don't want to make it bigger than it needs to be, but then you also don't want to make it worse than it already is. So, again, the investigation will happen. You will not know necessarily the outcome of the investigation, but it's your job to make sure that you report what your concerns are. So with all of the kind of damage that can happen to people who are dealing with harassment, why don't people respond? And if you think about maybe some of your students, thinking back to your own time in school, how many of you have witnessed somebody getting bullied at school? And why do a lot of kids not want to say anything? Well, they don't want to be the next target, right? It's like, hey, you know what? I don't want to be the next one. Same thing is true with, when we move it into the workplace of why might people not want to say anything? Sometimes it might be, like, I don't want to get involved in somebody else's business. Or, this really isn't, this isn't my realm, or I don't want to get labeled as being too sensitive, or maybe it's just me. And, maybe I'm just a little, too, again, I'm too sensitive. Maybe I don't have a good sense of humor. Like, I don't want to get labeled as that person. And a lot of times people might be afraid of retaliation, of, what's going to happen to me? Or I don't want to get rejected from my team. So all of these different reasons are pretty powerful. And the really key factor here is, when you look on this little Post-it on the right side, is retaliation for reporting any type of harassment is strictly prohibited. So let's say, for example, there is an allegation of harassment that gets reported. And to give an example, let's say people are talking at lunch and they're going into some pretty graphic detail about their date that they had over the weekend. Maybe there's some kind of mutual flirting going on, and the people at the table are completely fine. Okay, it is not unwelcome behavior. They're fine with it. But you are sitting at the table next to them, and you don't like hearing it. It's offensive to you. And maybe you try that VENT acronym, maybe you don't feel comfortable bringing it up, and so you report it. And the people find out, it's like, oh, well, apparently, someone doesn't like our lunchtime conversations. Well, if anyone needs help with, working on that project, good luck getting us. Okay. Is that retaliation? Absolutely. Because what that group of people are saying is, if you need help, like, I think kind of told on us. If you need help, we're not going to help you. That's retaliation. So refusing to participate and work together as a team, work on projects together, all of that can be retaliation. Or if your day off doesn't get approved, or if something happens that constitutes, like, I am essentially being punished for reporting some type of harassment, it cannot happen. So any of these concerns that someone might have, they are not valid. Okay, you can have them, but if there's any negative impact that happens to you because of reporting, that is prohibited by the law. So hopefully this one is going to be sort of an easy one. Okay. If a coworker tells me that I've offended them, what should you do? Okay. And so sometimes it may be a little tricky of, well, how do I know? I'm not inside everybody's brain. I don't know what that would look like. So part of it is watching someone's reactions. What are they doing? Like, what are you doing or saying? And then what are other people doing or saying? Do you get kind of a negative response back? Like, you get, kind of a look. You might get that nervous laughter. Their body language might change. You may not get that expected, laugh. I'll give you an example. Like, there are people who are huggers in this world, and there are people who are not huggers in this world. I am not a hugger. And so if somebody came up to me and gave me a hug in the workplace, instead of saying like, oh, thanks, I really needed that, I'm going to tense up. Okay. And just by that tense up, that's going to be an unexpected response. And so that would be a signal of like, oop, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have hugged you. And to ask like, hey, you know what? Did I overstep? And I'm going to say, you know what? I'm not a hugger. I don't like being touched. And then that person's going to say, you know what? Oops, I am so sorry. I won't do that again. I see this, sometimes with people like, it's like, oh, can I give you a neck rub? Or like, let me rub your shoulders. Would a reasonable person find that to be upsetting? Maybe yes, maybe no. But it's really paying attention to what is the response that's happening. And then looking at, just kind of asking that person directly, I noticed that you didn't laugh at my joke. Did I say something that offended you? I noticed that it felt like you kind of tensed up when I hugged you. Was that upsetting to you? And for someone who may be a little bit more shy or uncomfortable, just by asking them directly, that can give them a really good opportunity to say, you know what, I don't like it. And can you just stop? And you can just avoid having it become a bigger issue just really quick right away. So watching people's reactions and then being sensitive. So thinking about your different words, your behaviors. A good rule of thumb would be, if my principal was watching this, if human resources was watching or hearing this, would I be okay, or would I change what I'm doing? Or if my family members were watching this or hearing this, would I be okay with it? And if your answer is no, or yeah, I don't know that I would go this route, then that's a really good indication that you probably shouldn't do it. With harassment, I like to, a lot of times we can, sometimes live in a gray area. With harassment, I do not like to live in the gray. So my kind of rule is when in doubt, don't. And that can keep it very simple. We're living in a very kind of charged environment right now. So I think being extra sensitive to people is probably going to serve all of us well. So this is another acronym that you can look at. Again, if you have offended somebody, we hope, again, ideally, that people will come directly to you to say, you know what, I really didn't like it when you hugged me. I wanted to talk to you about that. So the first thing is listening. And this may sound easy, but actually this is a hard part because for most of us, we had no ill intention. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is we might get a little defensive and say, oh my gosh, no, I didn't mean anything by it. It's just a little hug, you look down. But just to be able to listen to the person who is sharing their experience with you. Okay, just hear them out and give them that space. And then when they're done, sincerely apologize and just say, I am so sorry. That was certainly not my intention. I'm really sorry that offended you. And then saying what you'll do is hopefully I will stop telling those kinds of jokes. I won't hug you anymore, or I will ask first. Before I hug you, I won't call you that nickname anymore. I will stop the behavior. And then the last part is thanking the person, which may seem a little unusual because you've just had this really awkward exchange. But for any of you who have maybe had the courage to talk to another coworker about something that upset you or something that was offensive to you, it is probably one of the hardest things that someone will do. And even though it's a really uncomfortable conversation to be a part of, it says something about you as an individual where this employee, this coworker, trusted you enough and respects you enough to come to you first, which is huge. Okay. There are times when somebody may not feel safe enough to do that, but this person is saying, you know what, I feel safe enough to do this. And I want to give you an opportunity. Like I want to really let you know the impact so that we can move forward and put this behind us. So being able to say, hey, you know what? I really appreciate you letting me know. Again, I am so sorry. Thank you for telling me. You were able to address what the concern is, and then you can both just move on. And this can really create stronger relationships in the work environment. It can really build a lot of trust. Because if you've ever been in, whether it's a friendship, a team relationship, professional relationship, when you have someone who can give you hard feedback, when you can work with conflict, when you can work with this kind, at this type of level, it really builds a lot of trust. And so this can make your relationships stronger, and it can create a more trusting relationship. So again, thanking them for letting you know. So really the last piece here is being aware of what your school's policy is on harassment. These are generally, I don't know of anyone who memorizes all of their policies and procedures, or it's like, oh, gee, I'm a little bored. I'm going to review all of our policies. But you really want to make sure that you're very clear on what your harassment policy is, so that you are, one, aware of what is covered under the harassment policy, what is the procedure for reporting, what happens, what are your points of contact for reporting, so that you're very clear. And this is also a really good time to sort of just do a self-evaluation on your own behavior, and making sure that you're holding yourself to the standard that is outlined in the policy, so that there aren't any questions. Or if you do have a question on the policy, ask before you meet it, so that you're very clear. And ultimately, this is about everyone having the right to be in a productive, happy work environment where people feel that they are safe from harm and that they don't have unreasonable interference with their work performance. So you want to make sure that everything feels good. Now, kind of getting back to the investigation. There will be, there's always going to be, a fair, discreet investigation, and whatever type of corrective action might need to happen. Now, if you are the person who has accused, or you have brought up the allegation, you will not generally know what type of remedial remedy has happened. Was there any discipline, kind of what happened to this outcome? And that's not something that you will generally know. And again, that's because we respect confidentiality of everyone who's involved. So if you have been the target of harassment, what you need to be mindful of is has the behavior stopped? That's number one. And number two is, has there been any retaliation? And if you can say, A, the behavior stopped, and B, there has been no retaliation, that's where you need to be. And then you need to conduct yourself in a professional way, and work with that individual in a professional manner. If there is any type of retaliation, or if the behavior continues, then you need to report that and it'll be dealt with. But again, we want to make sure that everyone is treated as confidentially as possible, and so that we can just really kind of move to that productive place in the work environment. So that is what I have for you today. I would normally kind of open it up for questions, but since we are recorded, I can't do that. So what I want to do is we're going to just sort of see if you, we're going to do a little bit of a post test here. So I'm going to give you a couple more questions. All right, so here's another question. Quid pro quo sexual harassment occurs when a female boss tells inappropriate or unwelcome jokes to men in the office. Okay, is that true or false? Okay, I hope that you are saying that it is false. Okay, why is it false? Because it's quid pro quo. So this for that. It is, so what she was doing, yes, it was a female superior, but it wasn't a this for that. So it would not be quid pro quo. It could be hostile work environment, but not quid pro quo. So I hope you got that one right. All right, here's my next one. If employees are offended by online videos being viewed in the break room, they should just take a break somewhere else or at another time, since people on their breaks aren't officially at work and they do have a right to free speech. Okay, is that true or false? Again, I hope that you said false, because the break room and break time are still part of the workplace. So telling unwelcome jokes is an example of a hostile work environment. Nobody should be forced to take breaks separately in order to avoid unwelcome behavior in the break room or anywhere else in the workplace. Okay, so that, I hope you got that one right. Let's try this one. Okay, if an employee complains about harassment to a supervisor, the supervisor is bound to keep the information confidential if asked to do so by the employee. Okay, true or false on that one? Okay, that one is also false. Okay, the manager or supervisor could be legally liable for ignoring a harassment complaint. They are bound to investigate, and details are only shared on an as-needed basis. Okay, so I hope that you got that one right. Let's see if I want to give you one more. Okay, some employees don't complain about unwanted sexual attention from others because they don't want to get that person in trouble. Okay, that one is true. So when we go back to that slide about talking about why people don't report, most people want to be liked by their coworkers and they don't want to cause waves. But again, that is not, that would not be a reason to not report. Again, you want to make sure that you're feeling comfortable in your work environment. So that is my presentation for you today. I hope that this was helpful, and that what my hope is that this was all information that you already knew and you feel comfortable with it, and you can say, yep, this is just a nice refresher, got it. Or maybe you're feeling like, there were a couple things in here that kind of stood out to me, and I'm glad that I have the information and I may make some behavior changes. Either way, I'm glad that I could be here for you and give you this presentation with this really important information. If you have other questions or concerns, you can always call Perspectives. I am the only Rebecca at Perspective. So if you have a question for me, you can call at 800-456-6327, and you can ask to talk to Rebecca. And our Access Center counselors will put you in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to talk through any of these scenarios, or if you have questions, happy to do that for you. And again, just remember that we are available to support all of you and your family members. And again, just through this very stressful time that we're all in. So I appreciate you coming, and I hope that you have a great rest of the school year. Take care. Bye-bye.